My name is Cathal Somers, and you're all very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar. I hope you all keep well and looking forward to another really interesting presentation. Unfortunately, the weather today is not great, windy and wet, but look, it's that time of year, so we'll have to put up with it. Lime is sometimes referred to as the forgotten fertilizer, yet it's vital for Irish farming. Correcting soil pH improves nutrient availability, boosts grass growth, and supports sustainable production. Teagasc research shows many soils are still below the target pH, making lime a key step for productivity and climate-smart farming. We're delighted to be joined today by Signpost Program Training and Development Specialist Mark Plunkett and Teagasc researcher Dr. David Wall. Good morning, guys.
Morning, Carl.
Morning,
How are
Colin.
you? How
Morning,
are you all
Fiona.
keeping?
Good now. Good.
All good.
Yeah. Where are you based today, lads?
I'm
Down in
in
the sunny
Johnstown.
southeast,
Yeah,
but it's not so sunny, Colin, this morning. So, down in Johnstown Castle.
down in
Yeah.
Johnstown here today, Carl. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to have to renamed, not the sunny southeast for a while anyway. It's been miserable for the last month. But anyway, the rain had to come at some stage. We're also joined by Teagasc Catchment Co-ordinator for Dublin, Fiona Doolan, who's going to help me out with questions. Good morning, Fiona.
Morning, Cathal.
How are you today?
Well, I can say that the weather is no better in the research centre here in Grange. So
Yeah,
sunny southeast or not, it's no better.
Hi.
yeah, we're starting to recharge the rivers for the year. Yeah, yeah. Look, lads, this is a really important topic, I suppose. So we just start out by asking, I suppose, one or two questions that always pops into discussion groups and things for me. Mark, Lime is on. I know you have on your signpost program. You have a 12-step guide, and Lime is, it's one of the main steps. It's one of the first steps on it for reducing gases emissions.
Yeah, Carl. Absolutely. It's high up on the agenda. It's number one. So it's the basis to nitrogen use efficiency and making best use of nitrogen on farm. And yeah, it's a key way of reducing emissions in terms of how we use that nitrogen as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, look, I know we're all looking to grow more crop and grass, but as a byproduct of doing the right thing, it's solving other issues as regards nitrogen leaching and gas emissions. So it's
Yeah.
all key stuff. And David, I know lime has been researched for many years. Is there still work going on in lime in the research world, or where are we at?
Yeah, look at a lot of the productivity type information is there, Cathal. There's a nice little bit going on at the moment in terms of lime and legumes in particular, so clover, etc. And the other area is, I suppose, looking at pH and lime as a central core to building soil health and soil resilience. So that would be some new area of research, but the research doesn't stop just because we think we know everything. There's always new things and new challenges.
Yeah. So at this point, just trying to get people to implement the research now is one of the main things.
Yeah, take the tools out of the toolbox,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. And Fiona, maybe you let the viewers know about our question.
Yeah, I'm expecting some varied and questions in here today. So I'll be keeping an eye on them all and ready to throw them out to our speakers.
Super. Okay, Mark, sure. I think you're going to present first if you want to share your slides. And just to remind everybody that we are going to be recording today's session. And please, as Fiona said, do submit your questions to the Q&A tab.
Yeah. Are we good there, Carl? Yeah, good to go.
That's lovely, Mark. Thanks a million.
Okay, thanks, Cathal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The title of my presentation here this morning is Lime, the Foundation of Sustainable Farming. So, as Cathal said, I suppose this is an age-old technology, and it's the foundation or the basis in terms of soils and grass and crop productivity. So again, I suppose the outline of my presentation here this morning is as on the screen. So again, in the essence of time, I'll move straight into it, Cathal here. So I suppose, look, in terms of sustainability, I suppose, look, it's a big part of the world that we live in today in terms of agriculture. So I suppose at an EU level, again, in terms of the farm to fork strategy. So again, there's a drive there to reduce nutrient losses and to improve the efficiency of nutrients, very much nitrogen that we apply in terms of the crops and the livestock that we produce on an annual basis. I suppose the other big thing there as well is that we have a growing population. So again, there's a growing demand for food. So we can't get away for that. And again, we're ideally placed here in Ireland in terms of food production and, you know, producing high quality food for those high value markets. And again, you know, I suppose the mission is that we want to improve or produce more while reducing our carbon footprint or reducing emissions. And again, that leads me into the climate action plan. So again, there's targets there for the sector, a 25% reduction in emissions. And again, I believe it's we can achieve a proportion or a large amount of that. And lime can bring a lot to the equation in terms of improving that nutrient efficiency, improving that productivity, and adopting the science or the technologies. And again, I suppose that's in train in terms of AgNav. So this is a new digital platform in Teagasc in terms of knowing your emissions on farm, looking at the technologies, and again putting technologies or a plan in place to reduce emissions and I suppose drive productivity in a sustainable way at farm level. I suppose in preparing for this presentation here this morning, I said I'd look back a little bit in the history books, and again, we're very, very fortunate. Noel Culleton, Brian Coulter, and Matt Wheeler produced a nice publication there called Soil Matters, and it's very much a history of science and how I suppose soil science, soil fertility developed in Johnstown Castle over the last 80 years. And when I look back, back in 1945, the soil testing department was established here in Johnstown Castle. And I suppose one of the big outcomes back then was that they identified that soil acidity was a real problem here in Ireland. And again, even the language that Noel uses in the publication, it was extremely low. And once they cracked that nut or identified that, it brought farmers in. And back then, it was very much lime it was burnt lime or they came from the killings. And again, a major limiting factor back in that, 1950s, 1960s. And again, at that time, it was actually very much towards crop production. Like it was a major groundbreaking development that, suddenly we now could grow barley, we could grow beet where we couldn't do before. So a big development for farmers. And again, reading through that publication there, ground limestone actually came into the scene. Again, the research was done here in Johnstown Castle around, we had lime quarries around the crushing, the reactivity, the TNV, and, that whole regulation or control of soil acidity. And actually, the grassland work came after that, in terms of, the importance of lime in terms of grassland productivity. We could grow ryegrass. And again, there was an enormous amount of work done around the major and minor nutrients. And in that time as well, I think it was 1963, Brian Coulter would have developed, and the researchers here in Johnstown Castle developed the lime requirement test. So again, they developed a very robust test that has stood the test of time, is still used today in terms of liming rates, in terms of regulating and controlling that soil acidity. So again, if we dial the clock up, into 2024, what's happened or where are we? Like we have made improvements on the lime front, but if you take dairy farms, like, there's 21,000 samples here, there's still 40% of our soils that are suboptimal for lime, a big figure in 2025. Dry stock farms, a bigger figure, in terms of suboptimal, 62% of our soils need lime. That's a major limitation in terms of grass production. I'll go through the impacts in terms of productivity. So, a big message in terms of dry stock farmers here this morning for me is that, lime, we need to correct that soil acidity, take action based on the soil test results. And also for tillage, again, we see that there is something like 38% of our soils need lime on the tillage front. So unfortunately, we identified it back in 1945, and even still today in 2025, there still remains a large lime requirement here on Irish farms. Again, if we look at lime use, now I'm not going to go back, we have a lot of data in terms of lime use over the last 50 years, but if we focus in on the last 10 years, what's happened in terms of lime usage, and again, there is a positive story there. If we look back between 2015 and 2019, where we on average used somewhere around 875,000 tonne. And again, if we look in the last 5 years, 2020 to 2024, that has actually increased to 1.1 million tonnes, an increase of 29%. So again, the message is getting out there. It is positive. And again, if you were to ask me for a figure for the current year, 2025, I'm guesstimating like it was a good back end. We're probably hitting somewhere around 1.2 million tonnes. But again, unfortunately, if we look in terms of the targets and the road that we're on, in terms of driving productivity, in terms of the sustainability of the sector, like the Teagasc MAC would show that in 2025, we should be hitting about 1.7 million tonnes. So we are off target in terms of the amount of lime that we should be spreading on an annual basis. And again, if we go to 2030 in the MAC, there's a projected usage of 2.5 million tons. So getting back to the lime that we used back in the 70s and 80s, that's where we need to go. We have a big lime requirement on our soils, and it can bring big benefits. Again, if I just draw you in around the whole area of um, like why lime, and again, I think it's very much linked to the whole area. It is linked to the whole area of nitrogen use efficiency. So again, if you take the image I have, I'm just trying to paint a picture for you here this morning. You take a hectare of ground, like if we get the pH right on a mineral soil, a mineral grassland soil, in terms of pH 6.3 to 6.5, we can produce an extra somewhere in the region of about 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per hectare. So we can increase the productivity in terms of grass production. So if we're growing 8 tons, we now can grow 10 tons. So you're looking at a 20% improvement in productivity. Where is that coming from? So the first thing is that soil health. Like David will talk about soil health possibly a little bit later on. But again, we're improving the physical in terms of the soil structure, the biology, and the chemistry. Like if you take the chemistry, we can release there's tons of organic nitrogen in our soils by getting the pH right. You condition that soil, you drive the life in that soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the earthworms, and our soils can supply somewhere in the region of 70 to 220 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year, depending on the type of ground that you're on. The same in terms of phosphorus. By getting the pH right, we can increase the availability, or we can, supply unavailable phosphorus on acidic soils anywhere between 30 to 150 kilos of P per hectare. So we can improve soil P fertility very, very easily by getting the pH right. The other thing is take slurry, take our sources of nitrogen on farm. Again, by getting the pH right, there's about 10 to 15 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So again, we're increasing the efficiency of that nitrogen to replace chemical nitrogen. And then if you take chemical nitrogen, bag fertilizer, we increase the efficiency of that as well. And again, that's what's driving the productivity. Also, by getting the pH right, it gives us the opportunity to bring in clover into swards. Our portion of our grazing block can have a proportion of clover there, and again can effectively supply or reduce a proportion of nitrogen in the sward. So very, very important in terms of NUE and driving nutrient use efficiency. So again, look, I see lime as the master nutrient. It's the enabler, it's the universal nutrient. And if we get the pH right, it brings many things in terms of driving the efficiency and the productivity and improving the sustainability of our farming systems. If you take soil health, so again, we're improving soil structure, we're improving the soil biology, and we're improving the chemistry. So we have a healthier soil, a more productive soil that's working for us. In terms of drainage, it's a better place to be for the bacteria, the fungi, the earthworms, and they're all mineralizing that nitrogen, that phosphorus, that potassium. They're improving the productivity. That's what's driving the extra grass production, that 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per hectare that I've shown you there. I suppose one big thing that soil fertility, and again, like lime is the foundation of getting soil fertility right, or driving nitrogen use efficiency. So again, this is work here from Johnstown Castle. If you have low pH, low P and K, by correcting the pH alone, we can improve the nitrogen use efficiency from 35 to 51%. So lime is a heavy lifter in terms of NUE. From just getting the pH right, we use that nitrogen more efficiently. We can supply more nitrogen from the soil in terms of the organic nitrogen, and also we use the applied nitrogen more efficiently. And by getting the P and K right, we often focus more on the P and K. Again, they lift as well. You go from 51 up to about 63% in terms of nitrogen use efficiency. So like soil fertility is a key package in terms of improving nitrogen use efficiency, and lime is at the foundation of that. Also, in terms of soil P availability, this is work that was done back in 2011, 2012 in Johnstown Castle. And again, we can see here on a range of soil types, we have a number of treatments here. We have a control. This is the change in soil P levels. From liming alone on an acidic soil, we can, improve the availability of soil P. where we invest in expensive phosphorus, again, we can also improve the soil P levels, but where we get lime and phosphorus right, there's a major benefit in terms of the unlocking the P in the actual soil itself, and also increasing the efficiency of the fertilizer P, or the P that's in, say, slurries or manures. So again, in terms of building soil phosphorus, it's the most effective tool that we have in the toolbox. We can move an index very, very easily, a full P index, and that would take about 150 kilos of P. And if we were to buy that as bag fertilizer, it would cost us about €375 per hectare. So for a small spend on lime, pays big dividends in terms of reducing our need for chemical P fertilizer and building the productivity of our soil. So in terms of when we get the pH right, when we move from the acidic soils up to, in this trial that was done here, we went from 5.2 up to 6.4. Again, we improved we improved the production potential. We can grow roughly an extra 1.5 tons of grass dry matter per hectare. So again, you're getting, the soil is working better for you. You're getting better efficiency or utilization of the phosphorus. And again, if I put a value on that, in terms of a dairy farm, by growing an extra 1.5 tons of dry matter per hectare, that's worth about €270 per hectare. And on a beef farm, that's €150 per hectare in feed cost savings by growing more grass. So you're getting more out of the nutrients that are in the soil, and in terms of the nutrients that we apply. In terms of legumes, I'm talking clovers, peas, beans here, we need extra lime. So these crops, they're more sensitive. We're working at a higher plane in terms of soil pH, in terms of the establishment and the productivity of clovers, red clovers, peas, beans, lupins on the crop scene. And again, in terms of grassland advice, we take a lot of soil samples here in Ireland. And again, a lot of them go in as ryegrass swards. But if you're aiming to get clover into those swards, we need additional lime on top of the recommendation that comes back to you on the soil test report. So we're talking about an extra 2.5 tons per hectare to get the pH up to where it needs to go for the establishment and the productivity of legumes in grasslands or in tillage crops or crops. And again, we're targeting a pH of 6.5 to 6.8 in terms of, white clover, red clover on the grassland scene. So we need extra lime to build that soil pH up to where it needs to go. So again, this is again in terms of boosting or maintaining, establishing the clover, but then maintaining the productivity of that clover. So again, this is a work from Johnstown Castle here again. And again, it shows that to maintain the productivity of clover swards, it's very, very important in the establishment that we have the pH in that sweet spot, that 6.5 to 6.8. But to maintain the clover productivity and keep the clover in the sward, again, we must maintain the pHs between 6.5 to 6.8, in the years thereafter. And again, there is, major production benefits there in terms of the productivity of those swards. Okay, again, if we in terms of greenhouse gases, in terms of nitrous oxide, so again, nitrous oxides mainly come from soils and from fertilizers. They contribute about 20% of our national emissions. But again, I suppose another co-benefit of getting pHs right or maintaining those higher pHs, that again, this is research done at Johnstown Castle here at a range of pHs. And as we improve the pH anywhere from, as you go from 5 up to 5.4, up to 6.3, and up to 6.9, we can significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So again, we can reduce at, up at that 6.8, 6.9, we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 38%. So another, I suppose, benefit or another, win in terms of getting the pH up or keeping the pH up at that higher pH. And again, what you're doing here is that you're switching off the denitrifying bacteria that are producing the nitrous oxide, which is a harmful greenhouse gas. So look, in terms of the payback, again, it's often a question that I get in terms of, what's the payback on lime? And it's the payback is big. When we improve pHs from 5.5 up to 6.3, Again, we can grow more grass. Um, I'm putting it something like an extra ton and a half of dry matter per hectare per year we can grow from just getting the pH right. And again, if you take a ton of dry matter on a dairy farm, it's worth about 181 euros per hectare, and on a beef farm, about 105 euros per hectare. So again, the payback on a dairy farm is 8:1. So for every euro we invest in lime, we get 8,000 euros extra grass back. And on a beef farm, it's approximately 4.5 times the payback. So for every euro we invest on a dry stock farm, we get 4,500 euros worth of extra grass back. Just to remind ourselves in terms of target pHs, again, you can see there what the target pHs are for the range of crops that we have. So again, I suppose, look, just just to keep things on track. So again, in terms of, I suppose, putting lime into action. So again, look, it all starts with an up-to-date soil sample. Again, there's a recommendation there for lime for the soils on your farm. Again, ground limestone is the most cost-effective way to build soil fertility and also to maintain soil fertility. We're very fortunate here in Ireland. We have about 25 quarries, active quarries, approximately a quarry per county. And again, it's going to give you long-term soil acidity control. Often something that comes up as well is that high molybdenum soil. So again, those soils we are operating at a pH of sort of 6.1, 6.2. Again, to reduce issues in terms of copper or locking up copper as you go above that pH. And again, I suppose some advice there, again, if we only treat 20% of our farm on an annual basis, if we have a plan there that we correct soil acidity or we maintain pH on 20% of the farm, it reduces that impact of high molybdenum or copper lockup where it is an issue. And also, again, magnesium lime, if it's available to you, it's a little bit slower to work. So, you may not see that issue as bad with a magnesium lime. So what I'm saying here is put a lime plan in place, set aside a budget each year to build and maintain soil pH levels. I suppose just a few rules of thumb. So again, only apply lime based on a soil test report, no more than 3 ton per acre in a single application. Also to emphasize, don't overlime. Again, it can lock up some of the major nutrients like the phosphorus. It is an issue on high pH soils, and also some of the trace elements like the manganese, the copper, the zincs can be quite sensitive as well. Again, look, we can apply lime any time of the year, provided field conditions are right. I mean, there's I suppose traditionally it was the back end of the year, but I'd be saying to you, whenever there is a window or an opportunity, whether it's in the springtime, summertime, autumn, wintertime, take that opportunity to correct the soil pH. And also some little questions there around lime and slurry and lime and urea. And, we generally say 3 months to reduce the risk of nitrogen loss. I suppose as well, just in terms of the extensive grassland. So again, depending on what you want from that piece of ground, and again, where we have meadows or biodiverse rich meadows, again, lime is not recommended to maintain, I suppose, the diversity in those swards. So that's something to keep in mind depending on the areas and the type of farming going on. So I suppose, look, in summary, I see lime as the foundation to farm sustainability. It's very important in terms of soil fertility, and driving nitrogen use efficiency, fertilizer efficiency in terms of, again, getting the most out of the applied nitrogen, and also in things like phosphorus, a major nutrient, also using the nutrients in slurry as efficiently as possible. And then that puts you in a very good position to adjust the level of chemical nitrogen. And it is happening out there on farm, where farmers have gone on the journey of improving soil fertility, they are now seeing the rewards in terms of being able to pull back or use the nitrogen more efficiently. They're getting more out of the slurry, and it also allows that opportunity to bring in clover into the system as well, again, to reduce our reliance on chemical nitrogen. So, Cathal, that was pretty much a whistle-stop tour of my presentation. I am now going to hand you over to Dr. David Wall. David is going to talk to us around, I suppose, the factors and a study as to, I suppose, that whole behavior in terms of when it comes to applying lime. Okay, David.
Super. Thanks a million for that, Mark.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning all. Thanks for the introduction. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. So, Mark has talked about the technical side in terms of Lime and its benefits. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the social and socioeconomic sides of Lime, but also nutrient management planning in general, and investigating why maybe farmers or land managers don't take some of these tools out of the toolbox and use them effectively. I must acknowledge, I suppose, the majority of what I'm going to present is some of the work conducted in the FASTN project funded by the department, and Conor Mulligan, who was a student at the time and is now a well-fledged advisor, should be acknowledged here, and also some insights from the NutriCheck Net EU-funded project. So let's get stuck into this. So the first question is, what's gone wrong with Lime? Lime usage has become a little bit inconvenient, maybe unfashionable for farmers due to lack of awareness, lack of maybe advisory or agronomist focus, inadequate marketing, you could say, or uncoordinated messaging, and the rise of fame of chemical fertilizer. And these are some of the feedbacks we received, or some of the reasons we received when this piece of work was being done. Think about a little bit, very briefly, the background to this piece of work. Basically, we focused around nutrient management planning, but specifically Lime in this case, and we wanted to find out what were the barriers, what were the attitudes there in terms of Lime use, what was going on, and we broke it down to 6 different stakeholder groups. So you have the farmers or the farmer producers at the bottom. Obviously, the lime industry feeding into lime. You have private and public advisory services, and also agri-merchants and co-ops. And then you have scientists, researchers, and policymakers here at the top. And the study regions, if we look at the map of Ireland there, very briefly, so obviously the study led out of Johnstown Castle and UCD. So we took the southeast, we took the Midlands, we took the northwest, and then we went down to the southwest as well, just to see was there differences regionally and to make sure we didn't have bias in terms of stakeholder input for this work. So I'm just going to deal straight up in the next few slides. What were the barriers or the issues identified? And I've taken and put the experts together and taken the feedbacks from those versus what the farmers thought. So in terms of education and awareness, number one, the experts felt that there was lack of awareness of the benefits of lime among farmers, those benefits that Mark has just talked about. Farmer misconceptions about lime, things like softening the sod, things like, well, it's not that effective on my soil type, or maybe doesn't work fast enough, or whatever the case may be. Poor levels of soil testing, but also many don't act on the results. So they might have the soil tests, they might have done it for compliance or scheme work, but they don't pull them out and act on them. Was another feedback, or lack of farmer continuous professional development programs. So that training and education piece for farmers out there. However, the farmers looked at this and fed back that they need some foundation knowledge, need some more training and input, may not always be clued up in terms of the benefits or lime or nutrients and nutrient management in general. However, there were misconceptions around lime usage and awareness among general farming community. The feedback was poor in some regions. Not enough soil testing being done was one feedback from the farmers, and they admitted that it was conducted for compliance or scheme purposes in a majority of cases, maybe, and not so much for them. In terms of the advisory, then, if we look at advisory and how that input is taking place, so the experts' lack of advisory engagement with farmers because excessive workload with bureaucracy, with schemes, with form filling, and not enough time, I suppose, to give technical advice. Private advisory focusing on schemes and don't have the resources, and that was their feedback. Advisory knowledge may be poor in some areas. Not necessarily Lyme per se, but Lyme and other areas, because I suppose the advisors are focused on the paperwork. And co-ops selling their own products, you know, they may not be engaged with Lyme. That might be a smaller wedge of their business, but obviously poor advice being provided around Grand Lyme was also a feedback from the expert groups. In terms of farmers, 66 admitted that advisory engagement was limited to schemes only. They didn't go in or didn't court the advisors or the agronomists per se for technical advice. It was more so to get their schemes in order and get their farms filled. Clients of private advisors less likely to discuss or receive technical info was another piece, and that's understandable in terms of the business model. Educational messaging. What are the issues, or what were the feedbacks around these? The experts felt that, you know, critical need to get messages back to basics, that some of these messages are too highfalutin. Specific messages for groups, so different messages for different groups in different regions, in different areas. Sell messages through educational avenues was one thing, that the primary education of farmers or you know, our future advisors, that these need to be brought back into the colleges and universities. And Teagasc messaging can be too scientific and too high up the food chain for farmers to understand, and those were the feedbacks there. In terms of farmers, information avenues that work, so they wanted the information, reputable farm walks, discussion groups, KT schemes, maybe the media, and increased advisory engagement on these technical issues were sought by the farmers. The messages being sold hasn't changed for 30 years. So stale messages, and that was the perception there, that we've heard it all before. But the message and the technical information that's provided might be still good, still worthy. However, I suppose if you've heard something too many times, it does become stale. And focus on areas where Lyme application is low. So it differs between regions. Some regions have a history of that, and others don't. Intrinsic motivations then. So those motivations by the farmers themselves to change ways in terms of nutrient management, or Lyme in this case. From the experts, farmers are animal people. So those were our grassland farmers, not interested in soil per se. However, you know, there's still a job of work there, looking at the soil stats and that to be done on tillage farms too. So if farmers are all animal people, how does that explain, I suppose, the tillage stats as well? And look at farmers are into their production. I can understand that, and you know, the soil may come a little bit secondary, not in all cases, and I don't want to brand everybody with the one brush. Inconvenient, necessary evil. So again, there's many steps to organising Lyme and that, compared with maybe chemical fertilizer. The influence of neighbours and peers was seen as important there. Lyme is old and not appealing, and that goes back to the previous one there. The messages might be getting stale. Lyme is slow acting, so you don't see the immediate change in terms of the grass or the crop, and only Lyme when receding was the feedback from the experts, that it's forgotten in the interim between reseeds. Farmers, not a priority job, so that kind of concurs with what has been summed up by the experts. Peers, past experience have a strong influence, and you know, those leaders in the parish or leaders in the farming community, if they're doing it, others get on board. inconvenience of the job. And again, that's, you know, that is coming through quite strong there. Hobby farming and not looking for those improvements, or maybe not improvements per se, but maybe not looking for the extra production if they're able to feed their livestock. Only lime when receding, and that fits with what the experts thought. And farm by feeling, stick to what works. And again, if you haven't used lime and you're getting by, it wasn't seen as something that's going to add to the business. A few other thoughts then in terms of visibility and those kind of aspects. Poor visibility of lime industry, non-existent in the sales world in some areas. Lack of competition in sales. And again, you know, many of our quarries and that, you know, they sell aggregate, they sell concrete products, etc. And lime is somewhat secondary. Selling products can be quite disorganized in terms of lime. Lime is too cheap. Farmers don't value it the same as they do maybe more expensive inputs to the soil. And lime does not give quarries a good return on investment. And hence, there's not as many sales or sales efforts going out there on lime. That's what the experts thought. In terms of farmers, you know, about 40% of farms in the survey felt that increased visibility would help, especially in areas where lime is not being used. Quarries, reps, contractors in the area all positively influence lime adoption. But again, if they're missing in an area, then that doesn't proliferate. And in certain areas, contractors are hard to get because maybe they're not actively spreading lime. There's no reps available to contact, and hence those relationships aren't built up, and lime is difficult to get or difficult to obtain. Nitrogen fertilizer was seen as another, or identified as another area. So the promises of chemical nitrogen masking maybe deficiencies and masking issues due to low pH and acidity. Farmers masking pH deficiencies with additional chemicals, and you know, that could be deficiencies in terms of trace elements, etc., because of low pH, or you know, putting on more fertilizers to mask where a crop is showing a deficiency. Constantly in farmers' eye line, you know, is nitrogen fertilizer, and less so lime. From farmers, always provides a response, so they're confident with the nitrogen fertilizer and less confident with the lime. Farmers use cheap N to mask pH deficiencies, and that concurs with what the experts thought. And you know, a phrase, it's gospel for farmers to get in January to purchase their nitrogen at the start of the year. Lime does not have the same appeal. They're not going out and maybe actively thinking about putting some of their input costs or hard-earned cash into lime at that point. Finally, then, in terms of policy and those limited policy focus towards lime, it was a general consensus by the experts from the farmers that loss and soil sampling schemes have a positive influence. Farmers have soil samples, but it doesn't mean they'll act. Derogation farmers have to lime and spread lime as part of that derogation. The loss of reps and other schemes is an issue, and no targeted scheme targeted farmers less than 170 on an ongoing basis means that they drop out of the mix. Finally, some practical issues. So issues around liming are different for different farms and different farming intensities. So whether you're, you know, more extensive or more intensive, it will change your I suppose focus on lime and these other things. Prioritization of finances, and those are cash flow issues. Farmers using practical issues maybe as a crutch not to lime, and then Conacre, certainly on the tillage side, and that, you know, this thing of I'm not liming it for the next person. From the farmers, yes, they believe that cost and finances, cash flow was a big issue when purchasing lime. Weather windows to spread is certainly up there. Soil trafficability, heavy soils and peat soils were on their agenda as practical issues. Rotations, either crop rotations, but also grazing rotations, tight grazing rotations and not time to lime. Part-time farming, less interested or less maybe time to organise that. Conacre and Renton also came up there and understocked. So if you didn't need the extra production, the perception was why would you lime, and also small farms and other issues there. So in terms of some take-home messages, well, look at I'll go back one slide really quickly. Regional differences, we were expecting these. From the farmers' perspective there, more practical issues facing farmers in the West and Midlands. They would be soil types, weather, etc. Greater proportion of extensive farms in those areas, and that might be one reason why there's less lime. And the availability of lime differs between regions. So very high in the southeast and south, and less so in other areas. So finally, some take-home points from the or from the different groups. So one was knowledge awareness, the second being advisory services, and the third being visibility. From the experts, lack of awareness and motivation of farmers was their take. Poor advisory engagement due to excessive workloads and the prominence of chemical N. If we look at the lime industry, not economically viable to actively promote lime at large scale in some areas. Regional differences in knowledge and demand, the southeast versus the northwest, and practical issues remain one of the biggest barriers. Co-ops and merchants, lack of awareness again, poor visibility, no one else getting involved with selling, and poor advice around granulated lime. And then the advisory services, lack of knowledge of lime amongst farmers and advisors were both. Advisors are key to targeting this information, but can't due to excessive workload. And you know that was the same for the both. And farmers aren't motivated. Extensive farms don't need extra production. Intensive farmers don't have time. And for the privates, poor visibility of lime was certainly an issue in their areas. So with that, I'll stop, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Super. Thanks a million for that, David. Just before we kick off, David, like that's an excellent piece of research. I think for us, it's great to be able to see over the fence on both sides, the advisors' opinions versus the farmers' opinions. And there's a million things stuck out for me there, but a couple of real core things stuck out. There's one comment from the advisor side or the expert side saying that farmers are animal people, not soils people. I think be a good few farmers offended by that, and I think they do see themselves as soils people. And the other thing that jumped out at me, maybe you'll comment on both, is you know, there's not limited policy towards liming, but I know there's a question in the chat that looks at that a bit. But to me, looking at Mark's side of the presentation, the line, if a salesman come into me or saleswoman come into me and said lime is going to do all the things Mark told me it's going to do, you know, it gives us 8-to-1 return on dairy, 4.5-to-1 return on beef. You know, it's brilliant stuff. But looking at what you've just presented there, that seems to be the obstacle there. And there's policy there, like as regards the question back that's come in is, you know, soil sampling has come in, but we need nutrient management plans to back those up, and we need someone to, I suppose, translate that nutrient management plan to action on the farm.
Yeah, no, look, there's a lot in there. Again, these are not my views; these are views from the various stakeholders. And yeah, look, I can imagine there's farmers would be offended to think that they're not interested in the soils or whatever. But if I suppose the various expert groups are thinking that, then they're probably not engaging farmers. So there may be a problem on that side as much as there's a problem on the primary user side. So again, these are all issues there that if agronomists and think that farmers are into their animals or they're into their crops and they're not into the soil, then they're not going to engage on that. So there's as much learning on that side of the house as the other. In terms of the policy piece, you would question, or I would question, do we really need policy to come in behind this because of all the benefits that Mark showed? You know, and I'd agree with you, Cathal. You know, if the benefits are that great, why isn't it happening? And probably because of some of those practical issues. and motivations are bigger issues than maybe some of the technical information that we have in our arsenal. And this goes the same for many tools and technologies that we have. They sit on the shelf or they sit in the toolbox and they're not taken out because of other issues. And, as advisors, as researchers, and as policymakers, we probably need to think and put a little bit more stock into the other reasons why, rather than, just the technical and the leaflets and that kind of thing. Is there an education piece here? Is there a practical piece there in terms of something happening on a farm or time or something else that we need to engage with and overcome? So look, I'll save the rest for the questions as they come in, and we're happy to deal with some of this.
Yeah, Fiona, the Q&A is on fire there, so I'll let you at it.
It is. I might start with a few questions for Mark. Mark, just to take you back to the very start, when you spoke about applying lime being able to improve the nitrogen use efficiency of applied fertilizer, of applied slurry, can you just broaden that a little bit, dig back into it and explain how that improvement, because NUE is obviously a very important thing we're hearing about. How does it happen?
I suppose you're providing the conditions, like in terms of pH, like you take ryegrasses or clovers or cereal crops, like, they need a pH somewhere, but, take grasslands around, 6.3 to 6.5, I was saying, for cereal crops up to, 6.5 and above. So I suppose you're allowing those plants, to flourish or to grow. They'll root more, they'll call for more nutrients, they'll draw more nutrients. So you're providing the conditions, Fiona, or the environment, or you're conditioning that soil. And also you're switching on the bacteria. You're making that soil come alive. Basically, it's more active. The bacteria, the earthworms, all the small little invertebrates, they all start working. They all start turning over soil. They all start making there's a lot of organic nutrients in the soil. They make those available. So that drives the productivity, or it's a nicer place to be for those plants. So they perform. You know what I mean? You'll maintain the ryegrasses, you know what I mean, by keeping the pH right, or you drive the productivity of those plants, like.
And there is a kind of a follow-on question here as well, Mark, on that, and goes like this. So lime makes that nitrogen more available. It decreases the risk of nitrogen being released to the atmosphere. But is there consequently an increased risk that it could be lost to waters or leached? Or is that additional nitrogen that's available captured by the grass or the crop that's living in that soil?
Yeah, I suppose, look, there's a few steps you have to take. The first one is that if you go on board, get the pH right, get the P and K right. That's the first step. The second step, and then you've increased the availability, what's coming from that block of soil I showed on the screen. But the trick there then is that you must pull back. Do you know what I mean? You must pull back on the bag fertilizer. Do you know what I mean? Because the soil now is working for you. The bacteria, the earthworms, they're now, like, like, I was up in Mead yesterday, like, those soils can mineralize up to 200, 250 kilos of nitrogen from getting the soil right. So again, it's to know then that I can actually pull back. My fields are greener. I'm getting more out of my slurry, I'm getting more out of my fertilizer. So it puts you in a position to pull back the level of chemical nitrogen that, as David has talked about on the past, you're spooning it on. You know what I mean? To meet that deficit, and that reduces the risk of losses then either to water or to air, Fiona.
Yeah, so it's to take account of that. David, there's a few questions in here around the piece that you presented, and one of them is about, have we overcomplicated the whole messaging around soil sample and results, and maybe we need to, is it that we just need to simplify it and have clear messages from all fronts in order to get better adoption of the results and so forth?
Yeah, probably, Fiona, and to that, the person posing that question, probably is the case, I suppose. Some of this is, soil sampling in the past, and when soil sampling began, and the first lab opened here in Johnstown Castle, it was all about, I suppose, building more sustainable production, maintaining production, and at that time, I suppose production was very, very low, and what you could get was very, very low. So farmers were getting soil samples for themselves. They were using those soil samples to be able to improve their land, I suppose, is back in those days. At this point in time, it's definitely become a convoluted process in terms of you get your soil samples, you develop your nutrient management plan, but largely that pursuit has been done for a compliance piece. And that's a real travesty, I would say. You know, first and foremost, the soil samples are for the farmer themselves and to use them to make their business more efficient and you know, sustain the production, but also get the benefits there in terms of the environment and that whole bit, which is so important as well. So, you know, with a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of training to interpret those results can be very straightforward. The advisor will certainly be able to do that for you, and that should be something that every farmer does. You know, at this stage now with regulation or whatever, you have no P allowance without having a soil sample, and you have to assume index 4. So most people have soil samples that are on managed land. So when I say managed land, that's land that has an expectation of higher production. Obviously, there's more extensive land, and we're not talking about that land that maybe the desire there is for delivery of another ecosystem service. That's a totally different pursuit here. But we'll say high or moderate to high nitrogen user in that situation, or trying to maintain clover or something else. Yeah, taking out the soil samples, diagnosing what the issues are, it's relatively straightforward and simple. And the soil test gives you the advice. You don't even have to go to the nutrient management plan. So that's really key.
And again, a follow on from that is, you know, can we have confidence in soil sample results, the accuracy of the sample itself, or you know, how can that be negatively impacted by the technique or by the process involved in the sample, and how can that influence it? And maybe that possibly could be having an influence on how we perceive the accuracy of the result then at the end of the day.
Yeah. So look, we should have confidence in our soil samples. In general, that's a general statement, but you put your finger on it. The analysis that's done in the lab with all the checks and balances and quality assurance that's there in the lab steps. Remember that all our lab services that are out there have to be quality assured, but also the process, they have to be accredited in terms of that process. So there is a big brother looking over the process to make sure that things are correct. However, if the sample is not representative, if it represents the area inside the gate, or it represents, you know, whatever it represents, you can go through the quality in the lab umpteen times on the same sample to get the same result. However, it's still only going to represent what was sampled. So again, you know, taking your field, looking at the different soil types, looking at what's happened in the past, trying to avoid or be cognizant of areas where maybe farmyard manure was banked in the past, or line was tipped, or a cattle feeding area, that not all 20 cores are coming from that area because you didn't want to walk, or you didn't want to go to the back end of the field. If we do it properly on the W, the chances are that maybe 1 or 2 of those cores are going to hit those anomalies, but on average then your sample is representative. And you know, people don't know what has happened in the past, or what the legacy of something farmyard manure being tipped in a field from 20 years ago is happening. But if we follow the protocol and do it right, then we can have confidence in the samples. And from the lab perspective, there is a lot of checks and balances. So the sample is only as good as what it represents when it comes in that little box.
Mark, I might just put something to you very quickly. There are a number of comments there. In your second last slide, you related to extensive grassland or high nature value areas, or areas that we are not recommending that the same message goes out there. So the nuances of the message depending on the purpose of that that field or that area or what's happening. That has to be considered in all of this, doesn't it?
I think absolutely, like, what do you want out of field or the area of the farm? Like, and again, there is, very rich biodiverse swards there. And again, the science would tell us that if we lime those, we can take out, those high nature value
Mm.
species in swords. Like, so, it's just to be cognizant and, to keep that in mind, like, you know what I mean? That, to protect those that are, they're high value and, you know, maybe avoid those areas when it comes to liming, like, you know what I mean? That they're also providing a very important function in the landscape in terms of biodiversity, in terms of flora and fauna, wildlife, so yeah, I think that's important for us to keep that in mind, Fiona.
Just if I come in on that one, I think, you know, land ownership is in private hands. So the desire for a parcel or a field by the farmer themselves, they set the agenda in terms of what that field is going to do, etc. And if it is for an environmental outcome or a biodiversity outcome or a water pollution outcome or whatever, that's their focus. So this is why the conversation is really key with the advisor in terms of what the outcome is. And then the compromise is, if production is the first, so if it's the business part of the farming is to produce food or whatever, then that conversation is very different for those parcels, and that mightn't be every parcel on an individual farm, depending on soil type and everything else. So I think that's a very key point that you raised there, Fiona.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to slip in one very quick one because I know Cahill's watching the clock, but perhaps yourself again, David. A number of comments there about the use of gran lime or bag lime. Is there a difference in how farmers perceive the ease of use there or the uptake of that tool as compared to, the traditional ground limestone? Is there any difference in the attitude?
Look, it's certainly a good question, and it comes up a lot actually. So granulated lime is basically very fine rock, calcium carbonate or whatever the type of rock is. It has liming properties. Obviously, it has to have a carbonate. So the calcium or the magnesium is not doing the pH lifting. The carbonate is in that. So basically, if you finally take a rock, grind it down, and then put it into a granule, it certainly is easier maybe for a farmer to take on, put it in their spinner or their fertilizer spreader and apply it. However, it's a very different product in terms of its longevity of effect and how it works per se. So if we take ground limestone, there's 35% of that is finely ground, somewhat to the same spec as the granulated lime, or very close anyway. That's the fast acting proportion of the lime. And if we take, there's 35%, so there's 7 bags of granulated lime equivalent in a ton of ground limestone. So if we put it in those terms. Now, because that's finely ground, it'll react, it'll basically dissolve and react very, very quickly with the acidity that's there to neutralize it. Both will. So that lifts your pH here today, and that's the job done, so to speak. But now there's a job for next year, the year after, and the year after. So the coarser or the less finely ground part of the ground limestone works in year 2 and year 3 and year 4 as it weathers, as it breaks down and weathers and interacts with the acidity. Whereas from the granulated lime, that's all after being used. So you apply a little bit more granulated lime in year 2 and year 3 and year 4 for that maintenance part. So that would be the main difference. You'd have to look at the costs then of both. You'd have to look at the ease of use and access to parcels of land, heavy ground, etc. But, do the due diligence, talk to your advisor or talk to your agronomist on it. There is cost differential in there to be considered. And also, where it's used. So if you have a lot of lifting to do, if you're down in the 5s, pH 5.5, that territory, then it's probably more effective to put on ground limestone, a large quantity of ground limestone to do the heavy lifting to get you up. And then you could look at either product then as a maintenance product. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. I'd say, Cathal, I'd say I'm out of time on questions at that.
Yeah, unfortunately, are Fiona, but I think there's one really important question just to finish up with Mark, and I know we're a little bit over time, but Mark, there was a slide in David's presentation where it said that on both sides of the fence they were talking about Lyme not being a priority job. Can you give me a 30-second elevator pitch of why it should be a priority job?
Well, as I said, Cathal, it'll grow more grass. Like, and I think the world that we live in today, nitrogen is key. We need nitrogen. We have to use it more efficiently. And again, look, lime is the foundation. It's the starting block. It's the number one. It's the thing that we need to do. Do you know what I mean? To drive fertilizer use efficiency, to drive productivity, and again, the co-benefit there is that we can reduce emissions in the process. So we can do the same job. You know what I mean? By just using the nutrient more efficiently, and lime is the foundation to that, call.
Yeah, no, that's super and really well put, Mark. Look, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We're over time, so we're going to have to pull the plug on it. But massive thank you to everybody for submitting questions. Fiona has done an excellent job in getting through a lot of them, but I know we didn't get to everyone, but we will certainly cover Lyme again because it's a popular topic and a really important one as well. David and Mark, massive thanks for your presentations. Really interesting. It's an important topic, and it's very obvious that we have a job of work still to do in that to try and to implement that in farms, and it has lots of co-benefits, not just production, but also all the other environmental benefits on top of that as well. Thank you, Fiona, for questions, and also big thanks to Valmar in the background for helping run the show. And just for next week, Teagasc researcher Dr. Fiona Thorne joins us to discuss farm-level economic, environmental and transport modelling of alternative feedstock solutions for regional anaerobic digestion plants in Ireland. So that's not to be missed. It's a topical item as well. So look forward to seeing that next week. So do tune in again next Friday at 9:30. But until then, I hope you have a great weekend. Slán go fóill.